How do you know if you race to your fullest potential? This was a question that I received from Derek, and he happens to be a triathlete that was running a 10K road race to work on his leg speed. And he was kind enough to reach out to me. He allowed me to gain access to his Garmin dashboard, and we were able to nail down how close was his race performance to his true capabilities. And I wanted to share his question with you guys because if you've invested in yourself and you bought the Garmin and you're using the Garmin dashboard for analysis, I want to give you a couple tricks that you can utilize to see, are you really racing to your fullest potential? Before we dive into that any further, please keep in mind on a race day, I see a lot of people get frustrated because they say, I've got to get in better shape because I didn't race the way I wanted to. Or I like this word, I didn't race the way I should have or could have. If you follow me for any period of time, you know the three words I can't stand are could, would, and should. So there are outstanding circumstances that can throw a curveball in your results. And that's why I wanted to put this video together. Make sure that you're looking at the right analytics so that you know what to go focus and work on. I see people a lot of times, they just always throw themselves under the bus and go, I got to get in better shape. You might be in great shape, but there might be another situation or a circumstance that negatively impacted your actual race results. So if we come back to the original question, how do I know, am I racing to my fullest potential? Now, as a physiologist for 38 years at the time of this recording, the Garmin dashboard and the analytics that comes from it has gotten more and more precise. So your burden is to make sure that you train consistently with the heart rate monitor and make sure that you sleep with the heart rate monitor. And you'll see why that becomes very important here in a moment. When we go back and we look at Derek's race, we went and looked at some of his time trials and his field testing. And when you go and you extrapolate your max heart rate from a field test, you then train at heart rate zones that are specific to the demands of the race. Some days are very, very easy, what we would call an active recovery day or a tempo. There's days that you need to be working on top end speed. There's days that you've got to be working on endurance. And then there's days that you kind of mix and match those two together. So like for Derek, one of the runs that he was doing was a 90-minute run, 30-minute even tempo, 30-minute heart rate ladder, toggling up and down in zone 3, and then 30 minutes even tempo. So stop and think about that. You're working endurance, you're building durability, you're working on that lactate tolerance, being able to bounce off that race pace without going race intensity without going above it. So when we come back to the question, how do I know if I'm racing at my full potential? It's very easy. Look at your average and your max heart rate during that activity or that race and compare that against what you've tested in your training. Now, it does require the collection of data. If you're not collecting data during training, then how are you supposed to put together a strategy on race day? This is another area that we see people overlook. When we talk about doing race day simulations, we're matching temperature, humidity, we're matching intensity, we're making sure that our breakfast, our hydration, all of the strategies, all the elements that make up a good race, they have to be tried and true. Now, we all are human. We recognize that on race day, it's very, very difficult to say that you're going to emulate the exact same conditions. But obviously our goal is to try to get as close as we logistically can. So when you're training, it's imperative that you know what's your max heart rate number. You need to know what are the heart rate zones. If you look in the description box below here, I've got a resource. Feel free, download the heart rate spreadsheet. Make sure that you know how to use it. Because on those workouts that you're doing during the week, if you're doing an active recovery even tempo, that needs to be in heart rate zone 2. You can't go too easy on your easy days. When you're trying to work on your race pacing, you need to know what range you're going to be working in. I see this quite often where athletes think that they've worked on their race speed, and I always do everything off of heart rate intensity. Well, they didn't get their heart rate high enough to actually work on that energy system. So their perception was they were working hard, but from a development from the inside out of the body, they actually didn't get the heart rate high enough to create the adaptation that they're looking for. If you don't get above that certain number, you're never going to be able to improve that energy system, so it always becomes your weakest link on race day. So that's the way you can you can ascertain, did you race to your fullest potential? If you know what the duration of the race is, you should know what intensity you can maintain because you've tested it and you've tried it. You know how much fluid you need to take in, how much sports drink you need to take in for sugar and electrolytes and water. And then on race days, just execute. Now, I do want to leave you with one thread of thought. You always have to have a certain margin of effort that's available in case something goes wrong. I'll give you a very simple example. If we take somebody like a runner, I've seen people that will be running with their energy gels and they'll go to pull one out and they'll lose 3 of them. Well, I don't know if you've ever done this yourself, but if you're running along at race pace and then you drop something and you stop and then you run back, you're accelerating, decelerating, then re-accelerating, right? You're running along, you stopped. That takes a tremendous amount of energy. You accelerate back to your drop gels, you stop again, then you re-accelerate and try to get back up to race pace before you dropped your gels. It's very easy to go past that anaerobic threshold because of what we call the yo-yo effect. So think about your sport. If you have a tendency to go out way too hard and you go across that point, we call it the point of no return, anaerobic threshold, hence the word. You're performing in a mode with not enough oxygen, anaerobic. Your body's going to go nowhere but backwards. So it puts more of an emphasis on the value of understanding what your heart rate zones are and just kind of bouncing right up against it. Do it in training. Your body becomes more familiar with that intensity. And not only does your body become familiar with the intensity physically and mentally, you're also able to calibrate what your calorie burn rate is, so you have a strategy for nutrition. You know what your sweat rate is, so you have a strategy for rehydration. Now what is it that we've been able to do? We just allow a little bit of margin. You get thrown a curveball. Maybe the race, you come over a bridge and there's a huge headwind. Well, if you're already sitting right at that breaking point, and you come over a bridge and get hit with a headwind on a bicycle or on a running, say a road race or a cycling race, if you're riding motorcycles and you drop the motorcycle, if you're already sitting right at that threshold, what's going to happen when you pick that bike up? You're going to go right past that point of no return. And I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but there's only one direction you can go when you go that direction, and that's backwards, because your body's going to slow you down until it can regroup. And unfortunately, the race may have already left you. So go into it with a strategy, but allow yourself a little bit of margin for the unknowns, and you'll absolutely train to your fullest potential. You'll race to your fullest potential leaning off of your training data. Another great question. You guys are continuing to send in more and more every week. We love it. That's what our goal is here on this Coach Robb Beams YouTube channel. If you happen to have a question, send it in. We'd love to do some research, get it back in the form of a video to you. You can do so by sending it to contact@coachrobb.com. Thank you for taking time out of your day to watch this video, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.